Hope everyone had a good week. We're going to continue our look at the parables. Today, we'll be talking about preparing for the return of the King. But before we get into it, Travis, if you will lead us in an opening prayer. Thank you. All right, so the return of the King. That's what we're going to be talking about today. Not the Oscar-winning movie, but the three parables. The parable of the 10 virgins, Matthew 25, the rich man, and Lazarus in Luke 16, and then the sheep and the goats. Kind of a parable, kind of not, but we'll also hit on that in the end of Matthew 25 as well. So if you will, please turn to Matthew 25. And if someone feels so compelled to read verses 1 through 13 of Matthew 25.
Then the kingdom of heaven shall be likened to 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. Now 5 of them were wise, and 5 were foolish. Those who were foolish took their lamps and took no oil with them. But the wise took oil in their vessels with their lamps. But while the bridegroom was delayed, they all slumbered and slept. And at midnight a cry was heard, "Behold, the bridegroom is coming. Go out to meet him." Then all those virgins arose and trimmed their lamps. And the foolish said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out." But the wise answered, "No, lest there should not be enough for us and for you. But go rather to those who sell, and buy for yourselves." And while they went to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the wedding. And afterward the other virgins came also, saying, "Lord, Lord, open to us." But he answered and said, "Assuredly, I say to you, I do not know you. Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour in which the Son of Man is coming."
All right, thank you. So let's think back, before we get into this, let's think back to last week. When we're looking at parables, what are some of the things that we need to take into consideration when we're trying to glean some application from these parables? What were a couple of the things we said? The context, right? Context is very important. Who is Jesus speaking to? What is maybe the cultural context that this is being put in? So let's look at the context here. So we started in verse 1 of chapter 25, but Jesus is talking to his disciples, right? So if you go back, you've probably heard several lessons on Matthew 24, talking about, talks about the end of the age, signs of the end of the age. You have the abomination of desolation. You have the coming of the Son of Man, right? All these things he goes through, and he's talking to his disciples, right? They had gone to the temple, and they were like, "Oh, the temple's so big," and he's like, "It can be destroyed, and it will be destroyed." And so he goes through that, and then he gets, at the end of chapter 24, he starts talking about this kind of division between two groups of people. So in like verse 40 of chapter 24, then 2 men will be left in the field, one will be taken and one left. Verse 41, 2 women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken and the other left. And then again, if you go down to verse 47, this is kind of another little parable story, but he's talking about wicked servants and good servants. So he's as he's going into the parable of the 10 virgins, he's talking about judgment, and he's talking about division between 2 distinct groups of people. So we can get into here the custom, as far as I understand. I'm not, of course, an expert on first century Jewish customs, but my understanding is that it was customary for the bridegroom to go to the bride's father's house to get her and then take her to wherever the marriage feast was going to happen. Right, so that may be what is going on here. These people are waiting outside of the marriage feast for the bridegroom to come with the bride, so they can go in and get the party started. That's at least what my understanding of it is. The lamps, whatever these lamps were, right? They didn't run on Energizer batteries, right? They ran on oil. So they had, whether it was kind of those those lamps with a wick in it, or more of like a torch kind of thing. We don't really know, but whatever it was, they needed stuff for the lamps to work. Now, if we're looking at this, we have we have two people, the virgins and the bridegroom. Has Jesus ever referred to anyone as the bridegroom in his ministry before this point that you can think of? That might give us a hint of who he's talking about. In Matthew chapter 9, the disciples of John the Baptist come to him and the question is, look, we, the disciples of John, the Pharisees, we all fast, but your disciples, they don't fast. And why is that? And Jesus said to them, can the wedding guests mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? The days will come, this is verse 15, when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they shall fast. The bridegroom there being, he's referring to himself. So that kind of maybe gives us a clue about who the people are in this parable. The virgins, the people who are waiting on Christ, and the bridegroom being Christ himself. And kind of fitting in with the theme of previous of no one knows when, that day and hour. That's the kind of the whole point of chapter 24 is you don't know when judgment is going to happen, whether it's the judgment that came on the Jews, although they should have had some warning about that in AD 70, but ultimately our ultimate judgment, whenever Christ does come back, we don't know when it's going to happen. So the bridegroom is delayed, right? We don't know why he was delayed, but he was just delayed. So the 10 virgins did not know when he was going to be there. So that kind of fits into his whole narrative here. And it says that they became drowsy and slept. You guys think there's any significance to that? Okay, it could be, right? The disciples, right? Jesus asked them, it's kind of sad when you think about it, right? Jesus, he has these people he's been with for so long. All he wants them to do is stay awake and be with him and support him during this hard time, and they just can't hang with it. But some people think, that the sleep here is kind of symbolic of death, right? Because once they woke up, there was nothing, they couldn't do anything once the bridegroom came. Once they woke up from their sleep, there's nothing. Now, that I think you can also apply that to maybe not being watchful, right? That's another thing. But that's what some people might believe that the sleep is referring to. And so they wake up. They hear the cry at midnight. Here's the bridegroom come out to meet him. They woke up and they trimmed their lamps, right? So they got their lamps ready, and they had run out of oil. What do you guys think? The foolish virgins asked the wise virgins, they like, give us some of your oil, and the wise ones said, no, we can't share. Does that the whole idea here being that being prepared for the bridegroom, the oil not being able to be shared, does that remind you of anything? Does that kind of spark any idea as to what this might be talking about?
It could be that it's your faith and your belief in Jesus and faith. Have you done what you're supposed to confess?
Right. In the book of Philippians, can someone read Philippians chapter 2, verse 12?
Therefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, so now, not only as in my presence, but much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. Whose salvation?
When we work out our own, right? I can't extend my salvation to you. You can't extend your salvation to me. Everyone will be judged by what they do, not what anyone else does. So if you kind of think about it in that way, the oil here, you might think about it as the oil being the works, the preparation that they had done. It's not allowed to be shared, right? I think, I have, 3 kids, and I would love nothing more. I would give everything to know that they were going to go to heaven, right? And I'm going to do everything I can to get them along that path, but there's ultimately nothing I can do about it, right? It's up to them. I'm like I said, I'm going to push them to go that way as hard as I can, but ultimately Their salvation is up to them, right? My salvation is up to me. And so the preparation that they made could not be shared at the very end here. There was nothing you could do when the time had come to kind of to spread that around. And then something that stuck out to me when looking at this parable is so the foolish virgins go out to buy some more oil, but it's too late at that point. They come back, and it says, while they were going to buy, the bridegroom came. Those who were ready with him, and those who were ready went in with him to the marriage feast, and the door was shut. That kind of stuck out in my mind, that phrase, the door was shut. Can you think of somewhere else that we might have heard that phrase specifically in a similar kind of context? Think back in the book of Genesis. Genesis chapter 7. Of course, Noah has built the ark. He's brought all the animals on it. They went into the ark. This is verse 15. With Noah, two and two of all flesh, in which is the breath of life. Those that entered, male and female of all flesh, went in as God had commanded, and the Lord shut them in. Right? God shut the door to the ark, and once it started raining, right, once He shut the door, no one else could get in. Right? Same kind of idea here. Once the door to the feast was shut, there was no second option. You couldn't go around the back to the fire exit and get in that way, right? There was no way to get in. So what was the sin of the foolish virgins? Why were they not allowed to come in? Now think about it. They were there, right? They were there. They're with the wise virgins. They were there. They just had, neglected to bring enough oil. But really, what was their sin, or the reason that they weren't allowed into the wedding feast? Right. They didn't think ahead, right? They, at some point during the day, they looked at the amount of oil they had and the amount of time they had, and they're like, it'll be okay, right? I can make do with what I have. This phrase that the bridegroom says, right? They come and they say that the foolish virgins come back and they say, Lord, Lord, open to us. And He answered, truly I say to you, I do not know you. There's another passage that Jesus has said He said in the Sermon on the Mount that is very similar to that. Does that ring a bell? In Matthew chapter 7, verses 21 through 23. If someone could read Matthew 7, 21 through 23.
Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. But he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven will enter. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name cast out demons, and in your name perform many miracles? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. So this is the same kind of thing, right? I never knew you. I don't know who you are. These people in Matthew 7 that Jesus is talking about, they have done things, right? They say, we've prophesied, we've cast out demons, we've done mighty works. The virgins, they showed up. They were ready to go into the wedding. They were ready to go into the wedding feast, except for small detail of not having enough oil. But both groups in this case get the same reply from Jesus. I don't know you. Depart from me. You're not going to come in here. So the application for this. Why is it so hard for us to stay prepared as a Christian?
Go ahead. I think one of the main things that I'm looking at with this passage is the outlook that both parties have. You look at the prudent and their outlook that have been, we understand the job that we've been tasked with. We're about to do something, we're about to have a responsibility on our part, and they look at it as we need to be prepared in the best way because we know that there's something that we have to do, and if we don't have everything that we need, we will not be
adequate to carry out the task that we're going to have. And the foolish, there's no preparation at all, so it kind of shows their outlook on what they're supposed to do. That, you know, maybe they're a little more careless and, oh, we'll figure it out when we get there. Or, oh, we'll just live day by day. But there's more of a we're seeing in the future of, hey, we might run out of oil, or hey, this might happen, we need to be prepared. So I think the contrast of the mindsets of both of these parties is something that we can look at as an application for a mindset on our.
Right, because ultimately, what messed the foolish virgins up? Right, the bridegroom was delayed, right, and they didn't anticipate that. They didn't think, oh, there might be a chance that they get stuck in traffic and they can't get to the wedding feast on time. But the wise virgins, they did. They had that idea of, well, I have enough oil in my lamp to last until 10 p.m. But if something happens, I'm going to bring a little extra. So that idea of looking ahead and not just anticipating that everything is going to go exactly as you think. Would it be better for us if we knew when Jesus was going to come back? Do you think? Anyone in here ever driven a car and run out of gas? You have a thing on the gasket. My mom did, when I was in middle school, she must have run out in the span of 2 years 5 times, run out of gas. And it's you're looking at it and it's going down. It tells you, there's a little light that comes on that says you have 10 miles to go. And you're always, I can get a little further, right? Do we really think that if we knew when Jesus was going to come back that we would have a better shot of getting into heaven or being saved? Right, because we don't know when he's going to come back, right? It could be now. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah, we tell us that we're not going to do it. We're hard-headed and no. You think we want to say yes. But there's also another application here. There are a lot of people who are Christian-ish who aren't Christian. Mm-hmm. We enjoy hanging around friends at church. We enjoy eating with friends at church. We enjoy the stability of a Bible-oriented environment, but we're not willing to commit ourselves. And I think there's a parallel thing here. People hanging around with Christians who aren't willing to go that way also.
The time. Yeah, I think.
Let me rephrase that. All of you guys would probably want to know when Jesus come back, and y'all be ready, but I'm like that.
Well, look, it was not that long ago that I was in school, and you get a syllabus. Having also taught a class, you give a syllabus that tells you when the tests are going to be, right? I would usually study, 2 a.m. before the test, right? I knew when the test was going to be, but it's more fun to play Halo, right? So, why study for the test, even though you know when it's going to come? But so why would we think that we'd be any different, knowing that? I mean, yes, the magnitude is much different when it's talking about final judgment, but that same idea would still apply to us. And I think what you said too, David, is right. That some people, it's very easy if you are around people who are very dedicated to maybe think that dedication is not necessarily, not that it was wear off on you, but it kind of covers you in effect. Yeah, I go to church, I sit in the pew, and I'll show up to things, but you're not really committed. And those, unfortunately for the 5 foolish ones, it didn't work out for them in the end. Any other thoughts on this parable before we go to the next one?
Well, I think that just the peculiar components of this are so interesting. It's such a strange and bizarre story that you have this bridegroom that's coming for these 10 virgins, and he's delayed for whatever reason, never gives an explanation. Then it comes at midnight and expecting them to just wait outside the door and all these peculiar aspects of it, but it's meant to just elevate are you prepared? Don't get caught up in all the details of it, because we can find an explanation for each thing, maybe, and come up with it. But the gist of it is,
right,
and it's wanting to put the effort in ahead of time, knowing that anything could come up, even with it being so peculiar. But you are prepared, whatever the outcome may be, because we don't know when Jesus is going to come. We don't know to what degree. I mean, we have
have some insight into what that may be, but we can't even imagine how that experience is going to be when he does come back. And that's why we just got to be ready for whatever may happen. We know the basic components of it, but it's going to be it's definitely going to be an experience when that does happen, and we need to be prepared for whatever.
Right. And I would say, I mean, this is talking about Jesus coming back, in our final judgment, but also just preparedness for just things in general. Like if you think back in, February of 2021, right? I don't think any of us were prepared. 2020, sorry. Wow, we weren't all prepared to go through a global pandemic, right? That changed. It's probably going to change our world forever, right? In some ways. But we didn't see that coming, and I don't think many people in the church were ready for the impact that would have on the church and how you would have to live as a Christian, and maybe how we would take that opportunity or not take that opportunity to spread the gospel, right?
One thing Jesus doesn't reveal there, but Peter does later on, the bright Jesus was delayed coming. Second Peter says he's being delayed by God because God wants everyone to repent. He doesn't want anyone to perish. And so I could see Jesus just anxiously saying, let me go be unified with the church, with my believers. And the Lord, the Father's saying, hold on a minute, we got more coming. And so, I guess the ultimate host of the wedding party is delaying the event so that.
Right. And so for us, the idea, that, yeah, again, as even though he's delayed, is delayed for a good reason, and we don't want to be one of the ones that falls out when someone else comes in, right? All right, good. Any other thoughts on this?
I always thought that this was a personality thing, like me being a firstborn child. I always had the extra toothbrush packed to the trip, and I'm like overly prepared with the diaper bag, that kind of thing. My sister, like, literally has never taken her toothbrush anywhere. And so I'm just like, you are so unprepared for life, But I don't think that this in no way could be an actual personality or child birth order kind of thing. Because I think that it just goes back to how, like, in school or in college, the way that we would not prepare for a test or not prepare for a trip or show up late or whatever it is, like, we're just not prepared. And because it reminds me of the verse in the same chapter in verse 23, it says, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over little, I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. For whatever reason, there are some people who will prepare themselves in little things, and that's what helps us with our walk with God. If we allow, like, distractions to be a thing over and over and over again, and never learn from those mistakes, like, I messed up all the time in college. And then I continued to mess up and be late everywhere I went with. I got married. I married somebody that's, super type A. So, but I've had to learn. I think that prepares me for the bride, if that makes sense. Like, if we're faithful over little, you take the little things seriously. You take responsibility for your own actions and all of that, and you prepare yourself in little things. Then we can be prepared in the big things. I do think the little things matter as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. I mean, and how you prepare, it's like
Whether it's your job, whether you play sports, right? How you take care of the small things is really how you will ultimately, like if you're talking about sports, right? If you pay attention, the little things, you're going to perform better. And some people, right? Some people do have a personality where you think about people who prep for the zombie apocalypse, right? They are prepared for this. That's probably never going to happen, right? But they are prepared for it. And then some people, some people have personalities where they prepare for things, some don't. And so for the people who don't have that kind of personality, it might be a little harder, but it's something that everyone has to do. Anything else? I'm going to speed through these next two real quick. All right, the rich man and Lazarus. Let's see. Luke chapter 16. I'll I'll go ahead and read it real quick. Starting in verse 19, there was a rich man who was clothed in purple and fine linen, who feasted sumptuously every day, and at his gate was laid a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, who desired to be fed with what fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, even the dogs came and licked his sores. And the poor man died and was carried by the angels to Abraham's side, and the rich man also died and was buried. And in Hades, being in torment, he lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham afar off, and Lazarus at his side. And he called out, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus to dip the end of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am in anguish in this flame. But Abraham said, Child, remember that you in your lifetime received your good things, and Lazarus in like manner bad things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in anguish. And besides all this, between us and you is a great chasm has been fixed, in order that those who would pass from here to you may not be able, and none may cross from there to us. And he said, Then I beg you, Father, send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, that he may warn them, lest they also come to this place of torment. But Abraham said, They have Moses and the prophets, let them hear them. And he said, No, Father Abraham, but if someone goes to them from the dead, they will repent. And he said to him, If they do not hear Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced if someone should rise from the dead. Okay, what is the context of this parable? And we didn't read the beginning part of chapter 16. But in verse 14, the very first part of chapter 16, Jesus gives a parable about the dishonest manager, talking about, and that's where in verse 13 we get the phrase, you cannot serve God and money, talking about having 2 masters. The Pharisees heard that parable, and it says they were lovers of money, and they ridiculed him. So that is we also get a little section in there about divorce and remarriage that's just kind of thrown in. But that is what is being, the context of this is that you can't serve your own desires, you can't serve whether that be money, power, whatever it is, and you can't serve God. And he talks about, you are those, this is Jesus talking to the Pharisees in verse 15, are those who justify yourselves before men, but God knows your hearts, for what is exalted among men is an abomination in the sight of God. It just says the law will not pass away. And then he goes into this story. Some people believe this is a parable, and some people think this is a historical event. We don't have to get in an argument about it, but right, it does not say, like in some places, he said a parable to them about the kingdom of heaven. There was a rich man, blah, 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 blah. So some people see that as, well, he doesn't say this is a parable, so this is obviously a true historical event that happened. I will just say, not going to come down one side or the other about which way this is, but if you flip back to Luke chapter 15, we read about the prodigal son, right? We generally call that a parable, and it starts the same way. He said there was a man who had 2 sons. The parable of the Good Samaritan also begins the same way. In Luke chapter 10, the lawyer stands up and asks him what does he need to do to inherit eternal life. Jesus goes in and he says, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. So a lot of times Jesus starts parables without saying, this is a parable, and here it is. So whether this is a parable or whether this was an actual historical event, I believe we can still glean stuff from it. But I just wanted to throw that out there because you'll probably hear, if you hear a lesson on this, someone might come down on one side or the other. Oh, I guess I should advance the PowerPoint, shouldn't I? Okay, so the rich man here we can safely assume that he was Jewish, whether it was an actual person or Jesus wanted to convey that, because for one, he's talking to the Jews, but also he refers to Abraham as Father Abraham. And the rich man knows Lazarus' name, right? So the rich man lives in luxury. Lazarus dies, in poverty. And when the rich man is in torment, he looks off and he sees Abraham and he sees Lazarus, and he knows who Lazarus is because he refers to him by name. In verse 24, he says, Father Abraham, have mercy on me. Send Lazarus to me because I need some water because it's hot down here. The idea that he knew who this poor man was in life shows that he had violated one of the obligations that he had in the law. In Deuteronomy chapter 15, starting in verse 7 says, if one among you, if one of your brothers should become poor in any of your towns within the land that your Lord your God is giving you, you shall not harden your heart or shut your hand against your poor brother. And he goes on through there, and it goes about, you need to give him what he needs. If it's the 6th year and the 7th year of release is coming up, and so he's not obligated to give it back to you, don't worry about that. You need to help him out because God is going to bless you for that. So the fact that he knew who Lazarus was, right? He was laying at his gate, and he didn't help him, puts him in violation of the law here as God gave it in the book of Deuteronomy. And if you read through the law, God was very concerned throughout the law about the Jews taking care of those people who are less fortunate. You have lots of things in the law about, being good to strangers, to widows. I believe someone, I can't remember, maybe it was Jeremy or someone else in one of the lessons I've been doing about Israel, talked about, not reaping the edges of your field, right? Don't go back and make sure you got everything up because that's for the poor, that's for the widow, for those who are less fortunate than you. So God was very concerned about that, and this rich man here did not take that to heart. But even though he was rich, right, he had whatever he wanted, and Lazarus did not, death comes to all, right? Everyone has the same ultimate end. And then if you read one of my favorite books in the book of Ecclesiastes, basically the whole book is about that, right? But in Ecclesiastes chapter 5, right, you're talking about as he came, just talking about people in general. As he came from his mother's womb, he shall go again naked as he came, and shall take nothing for his toil that he may carry away in his hand. This is a grievous evil, just as he came, so shall he go. And what gain is there to him who toils for the wind? And then again in chapter 9, verse 2, it is the same for all, since the same event happens to the righteous and the wicked, to the good and the evil, to the clean and the unclean, to him who sacrifices, and to him that does not sacrifice. So it doesn't matter how rich you are, right? Jeff Bezos is going to eventually die, right? Just like the guy who's panhandling on Atlanta Highway, right? It's going to happen to everybody. But one interesting thing in this parable is that even in death, this rich man kind of wanted Lazarus to serve him, right? He's like, look, I can see Lazarus, he's sleeping, he's resting, but send him over here because I need some help, right? Send him over here. And then when Abraham says, no, that's not going to happen, he's like, well, send him back, right? Send him back to the earth so he can go talk to my family because they need help. So it's kind of interesting to me that even in death, he kind of thought that Lazarus was his to boss around. But something that Abraham says when he is addressed by the rich man, he says, remember that you in your lifetime received good things and Lazarus bad things, and now he's comforted here, and you are in anguish. The old law had a lot to do, right? You think about in Leviticus chapter 24, right? They had the laws of retribution, eye for an eye, tooth for tooth. The whole idea of, what happens, what you dish out will come back to you, right? So you had the rich man who didn't care what was going to happen to Lazarus in life, right? And they got flipped around on him in the afterlife. Abraham says, right, the rich man asked him to send Lazarus to his family. And he says, what does he tell him, right? He says, please send Lazarus to my father's house. I have 5 brothers, right? That he may warn them because I don't want them to come here where I am. And what does Abraham tell him would happen if he did that? Or what was Abraham's response to it? Let me put it that way. In verse 29. Right. He says, they have Moses, they have the prophets, let them hear them, right? And you can imagine the rich man is kind of like a very stinging rebuke, right? Because he also had Moses and the prophets. So Abraham's basically saying, look, they had what you have, right? You obviously didn't listen, but they have the same chance. So, listen to them. He says, no. If someone comes back from the dead, they'll definitely listen to them. But Abraham says that's not going to happen either. Think about in the book of John, right? We have a real life example of this. Also, ironically, a guy named Lazarus, right? That Jesus raised from the dead. In John chapter 12, you remember that Lazarus dies, Jesus comes back to Bethany, he raises him from the dead. Did the Pharisees, after Lazarus was raised from the dead, were they like, oh wow, this Jesus, he's the real deal. You know, we probably better listen to him. What was their response to that? Someone read John chapter 12, verse 10 and 11.
So the chief priests made plans to put Lazarus to death as well, because on account of him, many of the Jews were going away and believing Jesus.
So someone had come back from the dead, and the chief priests, the Pharisees, the ruling class didn't believe him, right? So it's the same kind of thing here that Abraham is telling this rich man. He's like, look, even if someone comes back from the dead, that's not a guarantee that you're gonna believe him. Another example of this, one of maybe the most fascinating stories, at least I think, in the Old Testament, 1 Samuel 28, Saul, King Saul there at the end of his reign, he is going to go fight against the Philistines, and he doesn't know what to do because Samuel is dead, right? Samuel the prophet, right? He is kind of the guy, right? He had anointed Saul. Saul had kind of leaned on him, obviously had gone away from him because he didn't do what God wanted him to. But at the end of his life, Saul doesn't know what to do. He goes to the witch at Endor, not the Star Wars planet, but the place in Israel. And he asks her, you know, bring Samuel back from the dead. And Samuel comes back. And Samuel tells him, look, if you fight the Philistines, you're going to die. Saul gets really upset and then goes out and fights the Philistines, right? So just because you see someone come back from the afterlife and tell you something, we have two real-world examples there of that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to listen to them. All right, moving along here because I know we almost out of time. Yes.
Jesus coming back as well.
Right. Yeah. That was the obvious one. Yes.
He came back, and there's tons of evidence on that, but they still don't believe. So I think that's one of the main things to take away from that parable is Jesus is going to return from the dead, and that's not going to do much for your belief.
Right. And I mean, you think about when Jesus was crucified, people rose from the dead. We kind of gloss over that when it talks about the earth, the temple veil was torn, there was an earthquake, people rose from the dead. We just kind of go back, but that happened too. But yeah, exactly. Jesus being the ultimate example of that is that even after he rose from the dead, the people still didn't believe in him. Some of them did, obviously, but not everybody. One way we can look at this parable, right, kind of more of in an allegoric way, is that Jesus is foreshadowing the rich man being the Jews, had the riches of God's blessing. They were God's people. They were God's chosen people. They had been for thousands of years. Lazarus, representing the Gentiles, was outside. He was excluded from those riches, and he wanted the scraps from the table. He wanted what the rich man had, and that was gonna go away, right? Jesus was going to open up the kingdom, and the Gentiles would no longer have to be excluded from that. That's just someone I read somewhere that was their interpretation of it. So you may see that somewhere. I think that's a little bit of a stretch, but maybe it definitely fits with what did happen. The application of this, real quick, in the last 2 minutes we have. What is an application that we can pull from this parable? Story, whatever you want to call it. To me, the application comes in at the end when Abraham is talking about his brothers, right? His brothers have the law, they have the prophets. Do we have an excuse for not following God? Think about in 2 Timothy, 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 15 through 17. And from childhood you have been acquainted with the sacred writings, which are able to make you wise for salvation through faith in Christ Jesus. All Scripture is breathed out by God and profitable for teaching, reproof, correction, for training in righteousness, that the man of God may be complete, equipped for every good work. So just like the rich man, just like his brothers, we have no excuse, right? They had Moses and the law. We have the Word of God that should allow us, right, if we are open to it and we read it and we obey it, that will allow us to get out of that ultimate fate that the rich man found himself in. But any other questions about this real quick before, or any comments before we close?
You think that when Jesus raised Lazarus, that it was just a coincidence that he told a story about a man named Lazarus, or do you think the people who heard the story about Lazarus, looking back after Lazarus was raised, went, "Ah, I get it"?
It could have. It is interesting that it is the same name.
It's the same name.
Because he doesn't name in the standard parable form.
Right. Yeah.
Right, yeah.
There was a person, there was it's like this, like that. But in this case, he throws in a name. I was going to be on the side of foreshadowing someone named Lazarus is going to be raised, and you guys still aren't going to believe it.
That definitely could be true. Yeah. Any other comments? All right. Well, thank you for your attention. I hope you guys have a good week.